Hello Year 10, welcome to today's session on violence in Act 3, Scene 1 of Romeo and Juliet. The first thing I'd like you to do is watch the clip I've attached to the Show My Homework post of this scene and just watch to see what happens, try and get a sense of who everybody is because it's a different version to the one that you've seen prior. So you might want to watch that once or twice and then come back to this video so that you can pause it when you need to. So I'll give you a second just so that you've got time to pause this and go and find that link. So now that you've watched the video, I would like you to pause this presentation and try and think of a word or a phrase to describe each of the characters below. You're going to need to set up a page in your workbook to put your notes on. So if you do something similar to what's on screen, where you have Mercutio, Tybalt and Benvolio across the page, you might turn your page landscape to do this, and try and think of words or phrases or anything you can remember about those characters, please. Again, pause now so that you can do that. So you could have said, starting with Mercutio, that he's passionate, that he's funny, that he uses quips a lot and puns, so plays on words. He often takes what other characters say and kind of spins it back at them. He's also angry. He gets quite angry towards Tybalt because he's questioning his honour, and we've seen in that clip that hopefully you've watched, he's quite antagonistic, which means he's trying to fight. He's trying to fight Tybalt. And Tybalt really just wants to fight Romeo, but Mercutio kind of pushes in there. We also learnt about him previous to this that he doesn't believe in love, and we looked at that Queen Mab speech, which particularly gave us that sense that he doesn't believe in love. He believes in kind of the idea of relationships that are just built for kind of pleasure and for marrying for status. So then we have so you might want to pause here so that you can add some notes onto your Mercutio list. So whatever you didn't have there, you can copy the ones down off the screen from what we've just discussed. Right, next, Tybalt. So he values his honour a lot. He's very much the idea of himself is attached to that idea of honour. And he's very aggressive. He wants to fight. His first solution to anything is to fight. We saw that in the first scene, the bite my thumb at you scene that we discussed at great length at the beginning of the play, where he comes in and Benvolio is trying to calm it down, and he's the one that kind of escalates that into an actual fight. And he's like that again now. He's decided that Romeo has slighted him, has attacked him, and he wants revenge on that. So we can see those two keywords there that I'd like to write down: vengeful and revenge, two things that are very much associated with Tybalt. And he wants that revenge on Romeo because Romeo has turned up at the party. This would maybe be a good point if you're struggling with some of the plot points to have a look at that worksheet that you've got with the pictures of the play that we went over in detail about what happens on each section of the play. Or you could even watch that video again, and I will link that for you as well, so you can watch the SparkNotes version with the pictures on. Then there's Benvolio. He's kind, he's peaceful. He doesn't want the fighting that's happening. Again, you can see him trying to sort of stop what's going on. He's not trying to wind things up, he's trying to calm them down. So when we're thinking about violence, they've all got different kind of approaches to it. We've got two characters here, Mercutio and Tybalt, who can be quite violent, quite aggressive, quite over the top. The difference is that Mercutio, he winds people up towards violence, whereas Tybalt is almost just constantly aggressive. Every scene he comes into, he is shouting and insulting people. Then you have Benvolio, who is the opposite of those two characters. He's trying to reduce the violence in the play. He believes in being calmer, people trying to obey the prince's rules. So again, if you want to pause here and make sure you've got as many notes as possible from Mercutio, Tybalt and Benvolio, and then carry on to the next section. So now we're going to look at some specific quotes from this scene that you've watched. I'm not going to give you the entire scene because we talked about this in class, that we're going to look at the individual quotes that we need in order to access the best responses. So the first quote is from Benvolio, and he kind of makes this comment at the beginning of the scene where it's just him and Mercutio before Tybalt turns up. For now, these hot days is the mad blood stirring. And he's kind of commenting on the fact that there is this build-up of tension between the two houses at the moment, that the Montagues and the Capulets, this fighting is kind of brewing and bubbling up at the moment. He talks about, so breaking that down into things we can comment on, because we have to remember definitely that we need to be thinking about terminology that we can discuss. So we're going to pull out mad, blood and hot. So we'll start with mad at the top of the screen on the top right. The adjective, because it's describing the word blood, mad blood, suggests they're not thinking clearly. Mad here meaning crazy or insane, but also meaning angry. So it's the word itself has a lot of meaning attached to it in terms of them being about to fight. It suggests here that this fighting is inevitable. That means it has to happen. They are going to fight. And there's no other way that this could happen. So what I would like you to do is to write down that quote now on a new page. It should only be about a third of the page. You don't need a whole page for this. And circle that word mad and write yourself a note from what we've seen just here. You can pause. I'll pause after I've said this so you've got time to pause. And write that word mad down, and a comment about the fact that it suggests they're not thinking clearly, that they're almost crazy or insane. Benvolio kind of sees them all behaving like that, but he's not involved in that. So I'm going to give you a second now. So pause this just so you can set this page up with your notes so that you'll be able to do that. Brilliant. So, secondly, underneath mad, we've got the notes there that you can see on blood. Please excuse me for the pause. Blood is a noun, not an adjective. So can you just change that when you write this down? I can't alter it now that I'm speaking over the top of it. Apologies for that. But it suggests that everybody wants to fight. Again, Benvolio's making a comment about the fact that as blood is that essential part of the body, it's kind of attached, it's essential, it's inside everybody. And that shows how much they all want this violence. It's like built into them, which links towards those comments at the beginning of the play in the prologue when it talks about how long this feud has been going on, and we know that this violence is particularly it's happened over a really long period of time, and it's got worse and worse and worse. So if you pause again and just write some notes down on the noun, not adjective, blood. Then finally we have hot, which is an adjective, suggesting everyone wants to fight. The idea of hot gives that idea of pathetic fallacy, the idea of everyone being a bit uncomfortable when the weather's really hot. Everyone's a bit kind of tense and a bit almost a bit frazzled. He's kind of commenting on that idea that the weather is adding into this mood of tension that's happening here. So before the violence, the idea that there's going to be violence is very much set up from what Benvolio says. So again, if you pause and just write down a last set of notes on this quote, for now, these hot days is the mad blood stirring. And then when you're ready, move on to the next quote on the next slide. So the next quote we have is from Mercutio. And but one word with one of us, couple it with something, make it a word and a blow. So on the right hand side of the screen, we've got one to couple. it's again showing how he likes to play back the words. He's taking Tybalt's words and he's kind of spitting them back at him and mocking him by almost being sarcastic and taking his words that way. So it shows us that Mercutio is kind of intent on winding Tybalt up even more. Again, this would be a good point to pause, write the quote down, and then write down that note. The second note for this quote would be using the play on words, the noun blow, a word, and a blow, so not as in to blow air out, as in a blow, as in a sense of force, to hit something. It suggests he wants violence, but he doesn't want to start it. He wants to wind Tybalt up so Tybalt starts it. But Mercutio is very good at that. He's very intelligent. He likes to kind of mess with people's words in order to kind of get them all fired up. So again, if you pause there and add those notes in for Mercutio, or listen to this section again if you need to in order to get those notes down. Then we have Tybalt. And the quote from Tybalt is, this is now, Romeo has now come into the scene, and he's talking to Romeo, and he says, Romeo, the love I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain. So at this point, Tybalt is particularly angry. Have a good think to yourself why Romeo doesn't want to fight. Pause this for a second and have a think. So he doesn't want to fight because he's now married to Juliet at this point. So technically Tybalt is his cousin by blood. Not cousin by blood, cousin by marriage. He's Juliet's cousin by blood. So the two points, and we're going to take this quote forward to use in our Peter paragraph in a second. The first one is love. You take that word love out. He's being sarcastic. So your terminology here is the sarcasm. He's trying to provoke Romeo. Because Romeo's been talking about how he loves Tybalt because he's now married into that family, and Tybalt kind of spits back at him, the love I bear thee can afford no better term than this, thou art a villain. He's trying to kind of provoke Romeo, and also to kind of, it shows his confusion. His violence and his need for violence is stronger than even wanting to hear what Romeo has to say. Okay, so again, if you pause there, get that written down and get the note written down. The second thing here is the idea of villain. Now, villain is, we see the word villain as a villain in a TV show, or, you know, often in a kids program there's a villain. Whereas here, this would be really offensive to Romeo. It would kind of imply that he had no honour. It would imply he was kind of, you know, a criminal, which for somebody of his standing would be really insulting. So Tybalt is deliberately trying to say things that are incredibly offensive to Romeo so that he's got to react. So if you could write a note down about how offensive it is and put down that it's a noun, that would be great. And then pause and we'll move on to talking about how to approach the Peter paragraph. So you're now going to answer the following question. You're looking at the section in blue at the top of the slide. How is violence presented in Act 3, Scene 1? So how does Shakespeare present violence in Act 3, Scene 1? You should use the quote that we've just discussed on the previous slide from Tybalt with the word villain in it for your first Peter. I've given you some sentence starters at the bottom here to help you do this, so you can pause this and use these sentence starters to help you. Remember, we talked about on your point making sure that first word is always Shakespeare. So Shakespeare presents violence through, and in this case it's going to be through Tybalt's reaction to Romeo, or through Tybalt's need for violence or need for revenge. And then you're going to put your quote in. So this is shown in the quote, thou art a villain. Your terminology, you can use that noun for villain, or if you've used the part of the quote about love, you can talk about the sarcasm there. Then for your explain, violence is shown because. So I need you to explain that quote. So villain, we need to talk about how he's suggesting that Romeo is a criminal, that he is, you know, a disgusting member of society, that he's less than, that he's insulting his honour. And And then we need a comment in that reader response section for that kind of context. So that in Shakespearean times, violence was seen as. So think about how the prince doesn't want this violence. What they're doing is illegal. But because it's attached to that idea of honour and the idea of being upper class in society and having this honour attached to you, we need to make a comment about the fact that this violence is not just, it's attached to the feud between them. So what I would like you to do now that you've listened to the presentation, is then do this Peter paragraph. And when you're ready, if you finish and there's still time left on this session, you then move on to the second part, so the next slide. So those of you that have got onto this last slide, what I would like you to do is now attempt a second Peter using a quote by Benvolio or Mercutio. So you could contrast Tybalt's anger and violence with Benvolio, who in the opposite doesn't want violence, or you could use Mercutio to show also Mercutio wants violence, whichever you like. Personally, I'd pick the quote by Benvolio because there was 3 things to say about it and lots of techniques. Again, you can use those sentence starters that are on the page to help you, and upload your work onto Show My Homework for me, please. Okay, that is the end of today's session. Any questions, please let me know. And that's the end.